welcome to my channel. Welcome to today's video. Today's video is going to be another Would I Repurchase? So I will be randomly generating 10 palettes in my collection and then just asking myself if I would or would not repurchase them. So I'm gonna go over all of those palettes with you, tell you my reasoning why or why not, and just take a deeper look into my collection and if I made some smart choices. So if that sounds good to you, if you like eyeshadow palette videos, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I would love it if you stuck around. But with all that, let's just get started talking about some palettes. All right, so my thought process when talking about my palettes here, because this is a pretty popular video, I've seen quite a few content creators doing this, is I like to ask myself if I would still repurchase the palette having already had it in my collection. So if my palette disappeared overnight, you know, my sister came over, she took it and didn't tell me, would I go out and repurchase that palette already knowing the formula, already using it? Some people like to do it where if the palette was just launched, would they still be interested? I like to go about it just already knowing about the palette. So let me pull some palettes up. I'm gonna pull up my Tiny Decisions app. I updated it to make sure it was completely just up to date and everything. I need my notepad so I don't forget which palettes I pulled, and we're just gonna randomly generate 10. I think that's more fun than me just picking out 10 random palettes. Hopefully I don't eat my words and pick one that I've already talked about. Colourpop for Love and Justice. The Sailor Moon palette. Odens Eye Christmas Eve. Didn't I talk about that one? We're gonna go with no, hopefully not. I don't remember. So we have the Colourpop for Love and Justice, Odens Eye Christmas Eve. Now the next one is Natasha Denona Glam. And then Lisa Eldridge Myth. No, I didn't. Okay. Lisa Eldridge Myth. Number 5. Pat McGrath Platinum Bronze. Natasha Denona Star. Next one. It's always funny to me, the ones that are pulled. We get a lot of the same brands sometimes. ABH Sultry. Oh, that's actually untried. So I'm going to re-roll that. I put all my palettes, even my untrieds, and then I blocked them out, but I must have missed some. Huda Pretty Grunge. Lisa Eldridge Myth. Didn't I just pulled that one. I don't think I have it on no repeats. Okay, try again. I thought I was being smooth. I even made the disclaimer that I updated my palette list, and then we have that. Sigma Ambiance. Okay, that one hasn't been talked about. Peri Pera Fallen Acorn. I need 2 more. Unearthly Sorcerous Smoke. And Groovy Garden. All right, let me go pull those palettes and we'll start talking about them. I have all of my palettes, so let's get started talking about them. I'm gonna go in the order that they were pulled, and if I've done any videos on these palettes, I will have them linked either up above or down in the description box, or both. So the first one is the Colourpop Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon for Love and Justice. Now I know nothing about Sailor Moon, but the color story of this I really liked. It was, I think it launched like around springtime. I was feeling these tones. I liked that it was a little bit lighter. And quite honestly, when I did my video on it and when I've tried it out afterwards, I really enjoy this palette. I like the colors a lot. I think it's kind of, it's not fully pastel, but it gives you kind of spring vibes without going like full dedication to pastels. And it's one of my favorite Colourpop palettes, if I'm being quite honest. I would say that I love the Mandalorian the Child palette, and then this one's next. Yeah, like this is one that I remember that I have in my collection. I don't have too many Colourpop palettes left. I did declutter a lot of them, and this is one of my favorite ones. So I absolutely would repurchase this one. The second is the Odens Eye Christmas Eve palette. I did do a video on the entire Odens Eye holiday collection from this past holiday and then the holiday before. This collection is what made me want to try Odens Eye. I missed out on the holiday palettes when they launched them that year. And then the following year, they did mystery boxes. They did the Perfect World collection. And I bought those because I'd heard from them after everyone raving about this palette and the Christmas palette, the Christmas Day palette. And then they finally, last holiday, they re-released this because it was so popular. Here's what it looks like, and I will say off the bat, like this collection from holiday is much better than the last collection from holiday, the Snow Dream and the Hay Reindeer. You can watch my video to see my thoughts on that, but this one is my favorite out of the four. There's something just so wintry and sultry about this palette. I don't lean towards blues too much, but there's like these taupes in here that really help pull it together, and some purples that I love purples, the greens, the browns. Like I just really enjoy the tones of these shades, so I can handle the blue is what I'm trying to say. I'm very particular about blue shadows that I put on, and this lets me do it with just like a hint of blue if I want to. Like if I want to do a more purpley taupe with like a deepening up blue in the outer corner, I can do that, and it gives me a little bit something without being too much. I love this palette. I'm actually looking like, which ones of these would I not repurchase out of my list here? Sometimes you get good palettes and sometimes you get bad palettes. Just that's how these videos go. But I definitely would. I'm pretty sure that this was already pulled in a past video, but I'd have to go back and look, and I'm not going to do that right now. So if I've talked about it twice, hopefully my opinions match up, but I would repurchase this one again as well. And then the third palette that was talked about is the Natasha Denona Glam palette. I don't reach for this as much as I should, but I can say without a doubt, like I would absolutely repurchase it. This was my first Natasha Denona palette that I was actually really excited to purchase. I love like the neutral coolness of this palette. This is quite an old palette from Natasha Denona in like as far as just her releases. This was one of her first middies, if I'm remembering correctly. Like I think she had the Sunset, and then the Bronze, and then this one. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was early on that she came out with this one. And I remember that specifically because it wasn't very long after I had purchased the Biba that she came out with this. And I was like thinking to myself, you know, I would have rather waited for this than the Biba, because I was so excited for the Biba when it launched, and it was a neutral palette, love neutrals, but this is the neutral palette that I prefer. I would say that I Need a Nude beats this out now, but if I was missing this palette, I 100% would repurchase this. I just love Natasha Denona's neutrals. I think that this is a staple palette and one of my more used palettes in my Natasha Denona collection. And then the fourth one was one of my Lisa Eldridge's. I've talked about a few of the Lisa Eldridge palettes already. I know that for sure. Hopefully it wasn't this one. I don't think so, but this is one of the palettes that I like more. Now, saying that, I don't think I would repurchase it. I would miss it, but I don't reach for this palette enough to justify spending the price point to go repurchase it. Like, I know I would get my use out of the Glam palette, but this one, like, I'm happy to have it. I like the formula. I would recommend this palette, but it is a pricey palette. Like, I think they're over $60, right? I don't remember off the top of my head. I think that they were $60 palettes. I think. And while I like this, I love this iridescent shade here. Of course I do. The shadows just aren't, they're not giving luxury. They're just not. And while this is one of the better ones of Lisa Eldridge, if I'm gonna recommend a Lisa Eldridge, I recommend the Sorcery. This one, I just don't think it's worth the price point. So knowing that, trying it, if it went missing or if it went bad or something like that, I think I would just let it go and not repurchase it. I probably at that point would rather just pick up something that's actually new. So that one's a skip. We finally have one in the would not repurchase. Now the second one I would not repurchase is Pat McGrath. We have two luxury palettes I would not repurchase. This is the Mothership Subliminal Platinum Bronze. I believe this is supposed to be, these 6 pans were like an extension of her motherships. Here's what this one looks like. I honestly keep this around because it's discontinued. You can't keep it anymore and people went nuts for this. I don't see it though. And I'm afraid that if I declutter it, I'm going to regret it because it's so highly sought after, but maybe I should just let it go. As an extension to that mothership, I believe the one with the blue, the cool tone one, I can see it working, but I am not someone who's going to pull out 2 palettes. So that part's useless. And as a standalone palette, it's just not one that I reach for a lot. I'm really just keeping this for collector's purposes. A commenter told me recently that a while ago, Pat McGrath sold the majority of her shares, and maybe that's why like her just brand has changed over time. I don't know if that's true. I'm taking this commenter's person's word for it, but she comments on pretty much all my videos and I love her, so I'm assuming she wouldn't lie to me. But yeah, I can't get behind this one, and if I lost it, I wouldn't repurchase it. So that's my thought process. It only has 1 matte, some shimmers, and the shimmers just aren't spectacular. They're just kind of like average shimmers. They're not the Blitz Astral shades. So I'm not seeing it. I love the cool tone taupiness, but there's other Pat McGraths that I would just repurchase over this. So I'm going to stop harping on it. I've thought about decluttering this palette actually, and maybe I will, just because it's not really doing anything or improving my collection. I don't know. It's on the chopping block, I think I just need to come to terms with, honestly. Now, the next one that I have is the Natasha Denona Star palette. This is one of my most prized palettes. The reason being is that I used to watch Tati a lot, like back when like a lot of people watched Tati a lot, right? Like in peak 2016, like her heyday, I watched her a lot, and she raved about this palette because she wore it on her wedding. And I wanted this so bad, but this was $130. Here's what this palette looks like. I had it on like my Sephora wish list for years. Like since I saw that video until I found out that they were finally going to be getting rid of this palette. It was around the time that they discontinued the Lila palette and the gold palette, and people were finding it hard to purchase those palettes. I finally was making a little bit more money. I wasn't as poor as I was, like working a minimum wage job, 3 minimum wage jobs when this palette came out. But now, like when I heard that they were discontinuing it, I was like, you know what? You've had this on your wish list for actual years. Like just get it. And I got this along with the gold and the Lila because I had been wanting those palettes. I don't regret it. I like this more than the Lila. I don't know if I like it more than the gold, maybe not, but these are just my types of shades that is a little bit more warm tone than maybe I would like, but it's not a super orange, bright, rich warm tone. I don't like rich warm tones. This is warm tones that I can handle. The shimmers, you know, there's better shimmers out there on the market now. Natasha Denona does better shimmers now. So I will say that, you know, maybe the shimmers aren't my all-time favorite anymore, but I like reaching into this palette, and it's just one that I could never get rid of because I lusted after it for so long. This shade here, while it like looks boring, this is like one of my favorite shades ever. Like this gray leaning kind of purple taupe. Love it. Can't get enough of it. So I could never get rid of this one, and I would probably repurchase it just for sentimental reasons if I lost it. So that one is also just a repurchase. Next one that I have is my Sigma Ambiance. This was my first palette that I tried from Sigma. And when I did a video on this, I did a collaboration with my friend Bridget. I'll link her channel down below. She was like my first friend on YouTube, so I talk about her all the time. And we did a collab with this palette. I did not know what I was missing out on. Oops, the brush fell out. Until I tried this palette. Sigma has great palettes. Now I try to be a little bit selective when purchasing palettes from them because I have over 200 palettes in my collection. Like I need to be more selective with palettes, but this is a good one. I have this one and the new mod. I'm thinking about the cool neutrals. I kind of want that one, but I could probably dupe that out in my collection. It's just the formula of Sigma is so easy to use. It's so beginner friendly, but gives a little bit more. You know, it kind of gives me ABH vibes because it has the brush. It kind of has the same layout, like old ABH before they came out the Nouveau and Rose Metals, etc. And in my opinion, like this is much more worth the hype than ABH ever was, like over Modern Renaissance. I kind of just wrote this brand off as an influencer brand. Like people are always doing collabs with them. They're always talking about their affiliate codes with them. And when it's just like all these creators over and over, I sometimes will write it off in my mind. Like, no, they're probably not as good as everyone's making it out to be. There's no way. But I'm here to tell you with no code, no affiliation, like I really like this palette, really like all the palettes that I've tried from Sigma, and I'll continue to purchase them. I don't think their brushes are the best. I know everyone talks about their brushes, like they're okay, but personally, if you're gonna go with a synthetic brush, like I would go with BK Beauty over Sigma. I'm not sure the price difference, how much more expensive BK Beauty is, but if you wait for a sale, I'm sure it's pretty comparable. After that, Color Story kind of reminds me of the Natasha Denona Golden palette that just came out. I'm going to get the Natasha Denona Golden. I'm going on a little side tangent here, but I do plan on picking that palette up, just not right away. I didn't really see the point in getting it right away. I'll just wait for a sale or something like that. But it instantly reminded me of this palette, and I haven't heard anyone do comparisons with the Ambiance versus the Golden. So if that's a video you'd like to see, like swatch comparisons, let me know. Or if there's someone you know who did swatch comparisons, let me know, because I would be interested to see on how close this palette is to the Natasha Denona Golden. Long story short, I would absolutely repurchase that palette. I love it. I love the color story. Now, the next one I have is Peri Pera. This is the Fall in Acorn palette. It's one of these like long ones. I have about 4 of these. And trying it, knowing it, having it, I don't think I'd repurchase it. Like if I'm just being like ultra picky. Nothing bad about the palette. Better formula, you know, than the Lisa Eldridge. It's just, there's nothing bad about it. I just know that like I could live without this palette is really what it comes down to. So that's why I wouldn't repurchase it. Nothing wrong with it, but being just ultra picky, knowing how much I've reached for this palette since I've gotten it, it's just not one that gets a ton of love. And being that it's all neutrals, I could easily go into a different palette for this. So I don't think I'd repurchase it, but I would, if you like K-Beauty, I would recommend this palette. Like that's the thing. So this is one, you know, I do really like this. I hope that's making sense. I just don't think I'd repurchase it. I don't think I'd spend money on it again. So that's a no. We have 3 no's so far, and that's what it's gonna stay at because these last 2 are loves. I recently talked about both of these in my last eyeshadow palette ranking video when I did just a speed reviews on all the palettes I had recently done first impressions on. This next one is Unearthly Sorcerous Smoke. I put this in my number 2 spot. I'll link that video if you haven't seen it. I have fallen head over heels for Unearthly. Like, they are such a good indie brand. What makes them stand out to me in different than other indie brands is that they have a great matte and shimmer formula. Sometimes with indie brands, you know, like Lethal, for example, I mostly purchase from Lethal because I love their mattes so much. I find them easy to blend, easy to build. Ensley Reign, I mostly enjoy their shimmers. They have decent mattes, but I wouldn't say their mattes stand out. Terra Moons, you know, they have amazing shimmers. Just usually with an indie brand, you like one or the other. This has an excellent formula for both. And that's why, like, probably like top 3 indie brand I would recommend to people. Honestly, maybe even number 1. I find all of Unearthly's formula, not just this palette, because this palette is just a neutral with a twist dream, which speaks to my soul, but all of their palettes are so beginner friendly. The shimmers are impactful. They have very minimal fallout. They're smooth but glittery. Love everything about this palette. I would love to purchase every single Unearthly palette, but I wouldn't get my money's worth out of it. So I try to like pick and choose the color story, maybe a little bit outside my box. But for example, the High Temp palette, I just never would get use out of. Back to this palette, love the color story. It's a little bit warm, but you can make it neutral. It's not an intense warm. It's like more of a muted, desaturated warm. And I love it. I love the grungy tones. I love every look that I've come out with. This is a palette I would probably take traveling with me if I wanted something I knew I could rely on for just easy everyday looks, but also if I wanted to branch out, I could. Highly, highly recommend this. And if you haven't tried Unearthly, like, you're missing out. Really try them out. And my last one that I have to talk about is Ensley Reign. So I already spoiled it a little bit when I talked about Unearthly, but you know, the mattes are okay. The mattes are good. They're decent. They're not even average. They're good mattes. But mostly, you know, what stands out for Ensley Reign is the shimmers. Now, this palette is the only palette that I have from Ensley Reign where I like the mattes more than the shimmers. I was very surprised on how much I like this palette because it is a little bit more colorful. You know, it has these light tones here, but because they're desaturated, I think they look so pretty on the eyes. The shimmers, I find a little bit redundant. You kind of have like different textures, but I really wish like these 3, there are subtle differences. You can definitely tell the differences swatched out, but I do wish that they had maybe gone a little bit more of a difference with those shimmers to just make this palette a little bit more unique. But I have no fault. I would repurchase this palette. It's one of my favorite Ensley Reign palettes, I would have to say. And I rely on it quite a lot for the mattes. And it gives me like a smidge of an idea, or it reminds me a smidge of Simply Posh's Cozy Cabin, which if you watch my channel a lot, I rave about that palette. I love it. So if you missed out on the Simply Posh Cozy Cabin, this kind of gives you that. It has more shades. The shimmers aren't like coordinating. Like the Simply Posh has like coordinating mattes, colors, shimmers down the line. You know what I'm trying to say? It has coordinating colors, and this doesn't have that. You'd have to bounce around more, so it's not as well laid out as the Simply Posh, but I will say you could probably get close to the same color story with this palette versus the Simply Posh. And I don't think you can get the Cozy Cabin anymore, so I'd recommend this, even though this is a lot more expensive than the Cozy Cabin. I do have an affiliate code with Ensley Reign. It's just Melissa if you want to save money on it, or don't pay full price. I don't care. Use someone else's code, but I would repurchase this. It's a pricey one. I wouldn't immediately run out and purchase it, but I would repurchase this palette. So that leaves me with 3 that I would not repurchase. These 3, 2 Luxury, 1 K Beauty. Let me hold it, not weird. So these 3 here. And then that would be 7 that I would. So the Ensley Reign, Sorcerous Smoke, Ambiance, Star, Glam, Christmas Eve, and Sailor Moon. All these I would, those 3 I would not. This is also the reason I like doing these videos so much, to be honest. I try to do them the last Thursday of every month until I'm out of palettes. I like doing them because it actually does make me think about palettes that should be on my chopping block. Like I plan on, after I get through all my palettes, going through the ones that I said no on. Let me know if this is like what I should do after I finish this series and I get through all of my palettes. I want to take all the palettes that I said I would not repurchase and put them on the chopping block and see which ones like maybe I just shouldn't have in my collection. Because as much as I want to keep specifically the Pat McGrath, like maybe it's time to let it go. I think that would be a good idea. So let me know what you think down below. But that is gonna wrap up this episode of Would I Repurchase? Let me know your thoughts down below. If you have any of these palettes, if you love them or hate them and would not repurchase them, if I said that I love them, I'd love to know all your thoughts down below. But this is where I'm gonna leave you all. I hope you're having a great one and I will see you in my next video. Bye everyone.